Hey Gear Seekers, I'm Nick. Should you care about the new RTX 3080 12GB? No. Let's find out why.
Sometimes I say that I want you back, but
if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit that button right now and turn on that little bell to receive notifications. We upload basically every single day, so make sure you're subscribed to see when all of our videos and all that stuff comes out. Anyway, to kick this off, we've got no idea about availability or whether or not you're going to be able to buy these new cards from NVIDIA, because NVIDIA, the sly dogs, wanted to quietly release this new refresh without any fanfare or reviews. And the main reason, as Hardware Unboxed put it so eloquently, was because they didn't want a stack of reviews dropping at the same time, telling people not to waste their time and money with this completely pointless card. It's almost like they were trying to hide the fact that they were being shady. They didn't even say anything about this in their CES press conference. That should almost tell you absolutely everything that you need to know about this card. Now, I get why NVIDIA wanted to release a 12GB version. More VRAM. More VRAM's good, but god damn, read the room, NVIDIA. The 3080 should have had 12 gigs of VRAM from the beginning. Not only that, people are already annoyed at the fact that GPUs cost as much as a secondhand car, and then they want to release a refresh? Honestly, I don't think NVIDIA is living in the same reality as we are. It's kind of like this parallel universe where GPUs are affordable and available. What were they thinking? Don't even get me started on the 3090 Ti, right? That's not all though. The memory isn't the only change with the new 12 gig model. They've increased the CUDA core count, the SMs, the memory bus speed, the memory bandwidth, and the board power. So this isn't even really a 3080 at all anymore anyway. Why did they even call this a 3080 12 gig? It's stupid, and it's actually kind of more like a 3080 Super, because as you're about to see with the performance, it sits between the 3080 and 3080 Ti. Why are you like this, NVIDIA? Why? Why? All right, let's get the benchmarks and comparisons out of the way. We use our regular test bench for all of this to give you guys accurate results based on the testing that we've already done with all the other GPUs. Now, the card featured in this video is the Asus ROG Strix RTX 3080 12 gig. We're using this card as it's the only 3080 12 gig that we've got, and we're going to upgrade this whole test bench setup in a few months anyway and retest everything. But for now, this old faithful test bench behind me is going strong, so it's going to have to do. We also use the Asus ROG Strix RTX 3080. It's the white version as our main card for comparison, since the 3080 12G cards and the ROG Strix versions are the same, right? Does that make sense? And we don't have a 3080 Founders, and we never have, so that goes out the window. But let's kick it off with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and you can use that magic pause button at any time during the video to take a look at these graphs for a little bit longer. Let's dive in. The first thing you're probably noticing, even with this 1080p benchmark, the 3080 12 gig is slightly faster than the 3080 and sits between the 3080 and 3080 Ti in most tests. And this is going to be the trend we're going to see across basically every single benchmark in this entire video. Now, Linux always nets higher frame rates with this benchmark, but as mentioned earlier, it still sits between the 3080 and 3080 Ti. At 1440p, we're seeing a small uplift compared to the 3080. It's only a single frame, and that's just not enough to be considered faster, as it does sit inside a margin of error. In Linux, the 3080 12G is faster than the 3080 by a single frame again. That's also a margin of error, so there's no surprises here with the performance. At 4K, we're seeing the exact same thing being echoed in both Windows and in Linux with the 3080 12 gig. All right, let's mosey on over to Unigine Superposition. We performed 3 tests in total. We use a 4K optimized preset, 1080p extreme, and a custom 1440p preset with depth of field and motion blur turned off. First up with the 1080p extreme benchmark, this one is highly GPU bound, and we're seeing the 3080 12G pull right away from the 3080. In Linux, the OpenGL version doesn't perform quite as well. This is just how Linux is, and this is the same thing that we see across the board regardless of the kernel. the distro or the driver being used. So that's just something to note with Linux. At 1440p in Windows, the 3080 12GB is sitting right between the 3080 and 3080 Ti again. In Linux, the 3080 12GB is considerably faster than the 3080. This is actually a lot to do with the drivers, and I know that I said it didn't matter, but I'll come back to this later in the video and explain why it is this way. At 4K, we're seeing the same thing happen in Windows, and we've seen this across the board. So again, there's just nothing really here to talk about. Nothing here should surprise you. And in Linux at 4K, the 3080 12GB is slightly faster than the 3080, which is why this should have been called the 3080 Super and not the 3080 12GB. It's such a confusing, stop this. Why are you like this? Next up is Basemark GPU. Basemark gives us a great indication of Vulkan performance in both Windows and in Linux. At 1080p, we're seeing the 3080 12GB only be marginally faster than the 3080. Take into account that at these higher frame rates, the percentage difference is so tiny that it's actually within the margin of error as well. However, if we look at the 1080p results in Linux, the gap is far more pronounced. At 1440p in Windows, it shows the 3080 12GB sitting bang smack right in the middle of both the 3080 and 3080 Ti. In Linux, we're seeing the same result being echoed once again. Surprise, surprise. Not really. I mean, what more can I say? At 4K in Windows, we're seeing the same thing being echoed once again, with it being bang smack in the middle of the 3080 and 3080 Ti. And finally, in Linux at 4K, we're seeing exactly the same thing again. Recently, we added some new benchmarks to our testing. Since we're building up a database at the moment, we don't have results for every single card that we've got here, because obviously we're going to be upgrading this test bench as well. But here's a little bit of a taste of the performance with both Dirt 5 and Horizon Zero Dawn. As far as the additional testing that I mentioned in our 3080 Ti review, we're actually building up a nice new Linux GPU database as well when we switch to our new test bench. And we're going to be focusing on all of that benchmarking over on kernel control. We do have lots of new Linux stuff coming. We ran our 1 hour stress test in IDA 64 and we couldn't get the ROG Strix RTX 3080 12GB above 65 degrees in our climate controlled office. And be aware though that we're running on this open air test bench right here, and the results in a closed system will be far different from what you will observe yourself. Now we include this result because our open air test environment is consistent with everything that we've tested across the board, full stop. As far as power consumption, we observed this ASUS card hitting a board power draw maxing out at around 389 watts at full load over a period of 1 hour. And this is about what I expected from this card. Also, we observed the 3080 12GB to be audible in our stress testing period. And what I mean by that is you can hear it if you really, really want to have a listen. But remember, this is an open air test system. You hear everything. In a closed system, I actually don't think you're going to be hearing this card at all. Now, these acoustic observations that we do, instead of measuring it, is way more useful to regular people because acoustics just don't really matter, because if the card's not sitting next to you, it just doesn't mean anything. Now that we know about the performance of this card in our regular testing, we can come to a conclusion about the performance. Now, it's marginally better, but at the same time, should this be called the 3080 12GB? If we look back at Turing, we saw the 2080 and 2080 Ti launch at the same time, right when Turing came out. And then the 2080 Super came out, which was about the same overall percentage of performance uplift that we're seeing between the 3080 and 3080 12GB. Also something to note, in Linux with new NVIDIA GPUs, most of the time, it's as simple as dropping in a new card and it will detect and be accelerated from the jump with any previous driver that you've got installed. With the 3080 12GB, this was not the story at all. I'm a very, very experienced Linux user, been using Linux for over 20 years. Now, what we had to do was clean install, we had to update the kernel, and we had to update it to a much newer version, and then we had to use a beta driver, which was almost impossible to find on NVIDIA's website. Now, we tried to run this driver with kernel 5.16, but it was just so unstable. We dropped it back to 5.15.14 and it was stable. If this was truly a 3080 with 12 gigs of VRAM, we wouldn't have had to jump through more hoops than usual to get this card running in Linux. With all of this technical stuff aside, I still find it pretty insane that NVIDIA thought it was a good idea to release another new GPU in this current global climate. Now, this is actually just a warm-up lap for them because the 3090 Ti is still to come. And just to talk about this a little bit more now, our comment section is always filled with comments from people saying that, you know, they won't be able to buy this card anyway. I hear you, I completely agree with you, or that it's going to be too expensive. Again, this is absolutely true. Now, I'm not saying this to just pander to the audience and be an alarmist. I'm saying this because it's now January 2022. The initial 30 series GPUs launched in September 2020. People couldn't get them then, and they still can't get them now. And before it was more of a stock problem, now it's not just a stock problem, it's also a price problem. These cards are just way too expensive. This is supposed to be a refresh, which would simply imply that pricing would be the same or near parity with the 10 gig models. But this isn't true at all. Here in Australia at least, we're seeing a minimum of about $200 price hikes on a card that already costs upwards of 2,000 Aussie dollars as it is in the current market. That's more than double the price of the 3080 when it launched back in September 2020. And then you need to add a couple $100 on top of that as well. It's just nuts. It's too expensive. The thing is, with saying all of that, this actually equals a metric for us personally as well, because the interest in the PC enthusiast space because of this ridiculous pricing and availability has dwindled. Every tech channel and every media outlet has seen a direct correlation between pricing and people's interests. Personally, like for the last 12 months, this has hit us pretty hard with about a 77% drop off in people watching tech content on our channel alone. And that's us, we're not doing too bad. There's other channels who have been hit way harder. People also forgot that there is a pandemic still happening. It's still completely crippling fabrication. And on top of that, combining all of the factors that I mentioned, GPU prices will still continue to soar because if you can control the market, you can put any price on any hardware and people are just going to buy it. And this isn't exclusively NVIDIA's fault because AMD is doing the same thing. All the board partners are doing the same thing as well, but there's no level of responsibility. And I talked about this with the 3080 Ti video because as a consumer, the board partners and NVIDIA, they're not governments and they're not government bodies, so they can do whatever they want. They can put whatever price they want on anything, and people are getting pissed off about the whole situation. I'm getting pissed off about it too. I think enough is enough. Just take a breath because it's been annoying me for a long time. Anyways, guys, what do you think about the new 3080 12 gig? I don't feel comfortable talking about these GPUs like I haven't for the past year, although, you know, it's part of our job, so I'm going to continue to cover them because I hope that one day in the not too distant future, the prices will drop and you're going to be able to find videos like this one helpful. With the current global climate, it's just made it really hard to get excited about anything, not just tech. And to answer the initial question again at the start of the video, knowing what we know now, should you care about the new RTX 3080 12 gig? No, you shouldn't, because it's just another card that most people aren't going to be able to buy. And anyways, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you hated the video, you know what to do. Hit that dislike button twice and tell us what you hated about it or just tell us any thoughts about this card or whatever. Once again, thank you so very much for watching. I'm your boy Nick with Gear Seekers. You peek, we seek, and as you can tell, I'm so confused about this card because I want to tell you guys a little story straight off the cuff, right? This card arrived and I knew a new NVIDIA card was coming. I wasn't quite sure what it was. I thought it might have been a 3090 Ti sample because I don't know when that releases, whatever. I don't even care anymore. You guys shouldn't care either, right? So anyway, the card arrived. I looked at this thing. I'm like, oh, it's a 3080. Then I see 12 gig on the box. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And this is like a couple weeks ago or whatever. And then I didn't hear anything from anyone about a release date or press drivers or anything at all. We just had this card sitting here and I was just like, what is this thing? What is it? Stupid, confusing. I'm confused. Thanks for watching.